right, we are on chapter 4 of the book of Daniel tonight. Larger chapter and another familiar piece of history for us, but really, really good practical things, well, once again from the book of Daniel. So last couple of weeks with the different chapters, we've been looking at a really good comparison of how we think we know everything, but we don't. God has orchestrated situations to show Nebuchadnezzar, you don't know everything, and I do. You need to come to me for information. You may think that you have power, but you don't have power. I've got all power. And tonight, it's going to be a matter of pride and God humbling those that think. And I can understand why Nebuchadnezzar would have the perspective that he does. The guy is in charge of a world empire that kind of blows a guy's ego up a little bit. It's a lot of responsibility, a lot of limelight, but that could go different directions. And so God's going to have to drop him a whole bunch of notches tonight. And in the process, we're going to learn a lot. So let's look at Daniel chapter 4, and we're going to look at the first 3 verses. And these verses set up who is speaking. And remember, this whole section from Daniel chapter, let me back up a little bit, just into chapter 2, all the way to Daniel chapter 7, it's in Aramaic. So this is the official language of the Babylonian Empire, a little more formal. Not that that really matters, because we're getting it all translated into English, but just so that you know, this is not Hebrew, it's not Greek, this is Aramaic. But we have here Nebuchadnezzar himself speaking. These are his records. So most of this chapter is him giving the narrative, which is a great perspective, and it's very pertinent because this is my lesson that I want to communicate to my empire. So it wasn't him just saying something official. He's like, God just took me through something, the true and the living God, and I want y'all to know what I just learned. This is amazing. So first 3 verses of Daniel 4 say, Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. He's really setting the stage for more than just a basic kingly proclamation. This is a real serious build-up. So we're going to divide this up. This entire chapter is a testimony to the entire Babylonian Empire. And so we're just going to divide that into little chunks because this first one, verses 1 through 3, is just the greeting. This is how Nebuchadnezzar's setting things up. Here's your first blank. Nebuchadnezzar wanted his empire to have an accurate first-hand explanation for the leadership change of the past 7 years. There's a lot of history that has not been included in the book of Daniel. It just skips from chapter 3 to chapter 4, but this is a really neat format where Nebuchadnezzar says, let me fill you in why we've had some leadership shifting, and this is going to give the God of heaven great praise because of what he had to do to get through my thick skull. Now, I don't know if you noticed it, but if you were with us in previous chapter study here, if you go back to Daniel chapter 2, verse 44 and 45, there is a phrase in Nebuchadnezzar's introduction that details this prophecy from just a little while ago in Daniel 2, verse 44. I'll read those for you real quick. Daniel 2:44 says, And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Amen. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof sure. These are Daniel's final remarks of when he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's first dream back in chapter 2. And part of that dream was this huge image of the different materials, and at the end, that great stone was cut out of a mountain, thrown at the statue, obliterated everything, and that stone became its own mountain. Had Nebuchadnezzar terrified. And the interpretation was all these different empires throughout history are going to get completely blown away and forgotten because the empire of God is going to last forever. So remembering those certain points that God was trying to get through to Nebuchadnezzar, we now go to Nebuchadnezzar's opening, and he says that his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion is from generation to generation. Nebuchadnezzar in verse 3 says, I'm starting to get it. God's going to outlast my empire. God's greatness is way more than the Babylonian Empire. But it's taken a lot to get Nebuchadnezzar to this point. And chapter 4 is one of the keystone moves of God to get this point through. So Nebuchadnezzar is letting his empire know, just in the introduction, I have learned a massive lesson here, and I need to share it with you guys so that I'm not the only one that realizes these truths. So just with that concept of having learned a powerful life lesson, I really want to encourage all of you. Has God taught you any life lessons that would be really beneficial to pass on to your family? Do you have a plan for passing those things on? I really believe if you were to go home and sit down and say, man, what are some of the things God has taken me through in my life that have really shaped me the most? Good things, bad things, hard things, easy things, things recently, things way in the past, things I've not told anybody. I would really encourage you to formulate a plan to sit down and share those life lessons with your family. A lot of my perceptions of life, a lot of the things that, thank God, I've been able to avoid were because my parents were very open and said, look, we made mistakes when we were younger. So I look back at times where my dad would tell stories when he was in his late teens, early 20s, and he went out drinking, and he didn't know how he got home, and he woke up in the morning and realized, I have no idea if I killed anybody last night getting home. I have no idea what I did. I can't even remember it. And it scared him so bad that he left drinking completely alone. And this is as an unsaved individual. This is before God had changed his life. So I'm looking at lessons like that as a kid, and I had no idea the absolute treasure that he dropped in my lap. It's because of those stories that as I got older, and all of my coworkers, when we'd get off a roof, say, hey, Ryan, North Star Bar is right here across the parking lot. Come on in with us. We'll get you your first drink. And for the first time in my life, I actually wanted to go make those guys happy and go with them. Like, guys, I don't drink. They're like, no, don't worry about it. We'll get you a soda. Just come hang out with us. Just spend some time with us. And my mind went back to those stories. My dad learned some hard lessons. I think I would rather learn from his mistakes than to make my own mistakes. And the more I think about my childhood and the different stories people have told me about their successes and failures, I start to realize the blessings God's put in my life. So now I'm starting to look at my own mistakes and successes, and I think, am I passing these things on to my kids? I need to be humble enough and purposeful enough with my experiences or things that I've learned to help set them a little bit ahead in life. And I guarantee you guys have those gems, those treasures. Maybe it's a little humbling, but if you pass those on to your friends and family, you can give God a lot of praise and you can help them avoid a lot of mess. So I'd encourage you to please let God share with you what you can pass on with those life lessons. So let's look at the next section, Daniel chapter 4, verse 4, sliding all the way down to verse 9. Now, this is Nebuchadnezzar saying, all right, the testimony to my Babylonian empire, first my greeting, now this is my dilemma. This is what God allowed in my life. Verse 4, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But at the last, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee. Tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen and the interpretation thereof. So Nebuchadnezzar is communicating these things to his nation. And when faced with another terrifying dream, Nebuchadnezzar again reached out to his usual group of advisors. Same thing that happened in chapter 2, which I'm thinking, why are you going back to these guys? They didn't help you a little while ago, the last time you had a dream. No, last time he did command, you guys tell me what the dream is and the interpretation, or I'm going to kill all of you. This one was easier. Hey, I'll tell you what the dream is. You just give me the interpretation. They couldn't even do that. So these guys, at least as far as a dream interpreting job requirement, they're not doing so hot. But that also gets me to thinking, why was Daniel the last advisor to come before Nebuchadnezzar? Why wasn't he the first one that he called? Well, I suspect that the usual protocol moved up the chain of a busy command until competence was found. Daniel was probably only called in when everybody else had failed. I mean, that kind of makes sense. You don't busy your top advisors with the little stuff until you find, well, I guess it's not as little as I thought. Let's move up the chain of command. Now, that's just my thinking. I could be wrong in that. But Daniel is the top dog in the nation. I have a feeling he's got a lot going on, but not sure. I didn't live back then. But there are details that, if we look closely at verse 9, that Nebuchadnezzar's description of Daniel revealed key points of Daniel's reputation. And this is worth looking at because this really applies to our reputation as well. Nebuchadnezzar said, Master of the magicians, so you are boss, you're chief, you're the head guy, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. So it was well known what Daniel's power source was. It wasn't because he was intelligent. Daniel was really clear about this previously in this last dream situation. It's not that I'm any wiser than anyone else, O king. It's that God gives me interpretations. He is the source, and he is the one that I get information from. So it was very well known because Nebuchadnezzar is plainly saying, we know what your power source is, sir. We know it's the holy gods. And secondly, and no secret troubleth thee. Here's a cool word for you to brag or to use in front of your friends. Daniel's unflappable character. Actual word, didn't make that up. He is unflappable. So basically, the reputation Daniel had is nothing got him upset. He was given hard challenges. It's like, all right, sir. Yes, sir. We will make that happen. He doesn't lose his cool. He stays calm, collected, under control. He is known for this. That is what Nebuchadnezzar clearly said. So that ought to make us sit back for just a moment personally and think, all right, what does my work reputation reveal about me? Now, there are things I would like it to say. There are things that I think that it says to other people who see me. But from their perspective, what do other people see about me? And in fact, what do other people see about my God at work? Folks, it's really easy to be good and moral and hardworking and ethical, but not actually give credit to God. As believers, we need to be very clear with that. And we don't brag about it, we don't throw it in people's faces, but we don't hide it either. Daniel had a reputation. Everybody knew his power source, and he had incredible character to go along with it. That's the way we need to be nowadays ourselves. So hopefully in the past, you've had a strong work reputation that gives God glory and shows off the character that God has developed in you. And hopefully that is going to continue in your work testimony to today. So now we get into it, and Nebuchadnezzar says, all right, nation, empire, here's my dream. Here's what was going on inside my head and my heart as I slept. Well, let's look at verse 10 all the way through verse 18. Thus were the visions of my head in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and an holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree, cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field. And let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof. For as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. Dreams are interesting. You could assign a lot of different ideas and concepts according to your imagination. We have to be very careful to let God's word give us sure and concrete definitions. We are going to look at that more as we get into Daniel 7 and onward, because the rest of the second half of the book of Daniel is all prophetic. But God defines what some of those specifics are. We need to let him do that. When he does not give specifics, we have to be very, very careful at assigning the meanings. But we have interesting details here that definitely convey highlights and concepts. So in verse 11, when it described the greatness and the expanse of this tree, we see that it had very far-reaching strength. Covered to the end of the world, humongous boughs. We see in verse 12 that it was giving provision to all under its care, all manner of birds and beasts. So, these are pretty clear concepts. Verse 13, after seeing this tree grow up and become so powerful, heaven itself got involved. This is kind of interesting. So now you have these watchers come down. And in verse 14, heaven removed all the provisional ability of this tree. So no longer was it giving food and shade and protection. All of a sudden, those abilities are completely gone. And in verse 15, heaven preserved the tree after it was cut down, Yet the tree is extremely humbled, and it was bound for a specific amount of time. And we see in verse 16, and especially in verse 16 and on, the reference was to he. It goes from tree to he. So this is an individual being spoken of. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. So now it's getting more specific according to scriptural detail. So his heart is transformed from that of a man to a beast for a set period of time, these 7 times, which we know means 7 years. And then verse 17 was pretty much the moral of the story at the end of the dream, very clearly set out. The Most High ruleth in the kingdoms of men, and he gives it to whoever he will, and sets up over it even the most basic of men. So again, the clear lesson at the end, God is creating or has created a situation that forced everyone to look to him. Same situation as the first dream. Nobody knows anything. It's impossible for people to have any answers. God constructed it in such a way that everybody had to look to him. Same thing again. God is getting people's attention, making things impossible so that he can step in and have the voice and the attention that he deserves. So now we look at verses 19 all the way down to verse 27. We now see the interpretation. Then 19 says, Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished. Interesting word. Only time in Scripture that this word is used in the Old Testament. Daniel was astonished for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. The king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belteshazzar answered and said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, that art grown and become strong. For the greatness is grown and reacheth unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, Hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass and the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field till the 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, who has come upon my lord the king, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. And they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven. And 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee, after that thou shalt have known that that the heavens do rule. Whereof, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee. Break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. When you slide back up to verse 19, the word astonished, we would say more contemporarily, astonished. This is the word to be appalled, to be shocked, to be dismayed. It's got a very negative connotation to it. It's not just, oh wow, that's surprising. No, it comes with a whole lot of disappointment as well. This is a very specific word, and again, it's only used once in the Old Testament. So basically, Daniel is reacting in a way he's never reacted before. Remember Nebuchadnezzar's introduction. It's like nothing gets you down. Nothing shocks you, Daniel. You're always so solid. Well, he wasn't this time. And so that's why Nebuchadnezzar had to step in and encourage Daniel, because he's sitting there for a while not wanting to speak, absolutely shocked. So Daniel's emotional and verbal reactions, and the verbal being, King, may the dream be applied to people that hate you. I wish this did not apply to you. It revealed his negative response to the plan of God. Now, I want to be really careful when I say negative response. In that, why do you think Daniel was upset about God communicating? Well, not that he was upset that God communicated. He was upset about the plan itself. Now, I'm thinking from my perspective, this is the guy that ordered the invasion of my country and totally ruined my life and has enslaved me. And granted, I've got a good position here. My life would be a whole lot different, though, if it weren't for this guy. And now, I've got the privilege of saying, Nebuchadnezzar, you're going down. God is now punishing you. You have been prideful. In fact, I'm going to go clip my yard, put it in your lunchbox, because that's all you're going to be eating for the next 7 years. You are going to get yours, buddy. That is totally not Daniel's reaction. Daniel's upset that this is going to happen to Nebuchadnezzar. I'm like, wow, that is not the response that Ryan Cawley would be giving, for sure. But that is telling me that Daniel's got a relationship with Nebuchadnezzar. He respects the man, maybe even likes him. If nothing else, he recognizes this guy has got a great grasp on this massive empire. In fact, I'm wondering, is Daniel a little concerned? If you pull him from his position, what's going to happen to this empire? What's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to my people? Because I work with a whole lot of other folks that would love to get Nebuchadnezzar's spot. And these people could not do as good of a job. These people are not teachable. Frankly, they tried to get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego killed. There's a whole lot of other folks that I don't want in positions of power. If anything else, Daniel being pretty much number 2 in the land, wouldn't he be the one being able to take Nebuchadnezzar's spot? Whoa, I'm getting a promotion. But that's not Daniel's reaction. So as we look at these details and we look at these words, this is kind of amazing. So I would like to encourage you to think tonight. Daniel's negative reaction did not mean that he was in opposition to God's plan. So here's the point. We don't have to like all of God's decisions, but we do have to submit to them. Daniel was not thrilled about what God had just said, but Daniel submitted to that plan. So there's a lot that happens in our lives that's not a whole lot of fun. And we know, because God is sovereign, God allowed these things to happen to me. I don't like it, but I submit to God's will. That's a really simple thing, folks. But if we lose sight of that, it's really easy to say, well, this is the plan of God, so I'm supposed to be happy about it. Not necessarily. Don't put that kind of unrealistic pressure on yourself. Some of the things God allows are really hard, not fun at all. God's not looking for you to be joyful about the difficulty, but he is looking for you to trust him and to submit to his will. That's the proper attitude. And that's what we see Daniel doing. So as you sit back and you look at your own life, can you think of an instance when God allowed something to happen in your life, he revealed, this is my plan for you, and you didn't like it. But down the road, you realized later, you know what? God used this for good. And now I can actually look back on that hard situation and I can even appreciate what God did. I wouldn't want to go through it again. I still don't like it because it was not fun, but I can appreciate what God did. Folks, if you can look back at hard things in your life with that kind of attitude, that is called growth. That is called maturity. I've heard some stories lately from folks that I know, And they actually made that statement. I'm actually glad God allowed this in my life. Really? Yeah, because God did some really amazing things, taught me some lessons I needed to learn, ended up producing things that none of us could have done except through this scenario. So I don't like it, I don't want to go through it again, but I see what God did and I can appreciate it. Folks, that's powerful. So I would encourage you, sit back and think of some instances like that. And I think God will encourage you with that. He really will. Now, I don't know that I can go into detail about verse 25, except it's just another one of my questions. We see it in verse 16, we see it in verse 25, well, specifically verse 25, that in this interpretation, Daniel says, they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen. They shall wet thee with the dew of heaven. I'd like to know who the they is specifically, because there are different possibilities. Is this that Nebuchadnezzar is going to lose it, go animal-like, and the Babylonians are like, get this guy out of here, he's nuts, and just throw him out in the wilderness, and God is going to make sure that he gets taken care of? That could well be. Or, which I think is a little more of a possibility, since Nebuchadnezzar's throne room is now getting all this information, that as he goes animal-like, that they pull him out and they keep him pastured. And literally, they keep their king in a controlled, natural setting where they feed him and they protect him as best as possible until these 7 times are done and he gets his right mind back. So maybe the they are angels, maybe the they are his own people. Pastor Witham.
The reference to the watchers,
Mm-hmm.
You think they were angels? Is that, you're saying that might be the they here, the watchers, the angels?
The watchers would have to be the same as the they, which we know the watchers are making the decrees of God. But I think the they people in verse 25 may be different, may not be that same angelic. I would say that would be an angelic depiction, just giving a message, but I'm really not sure. And see, you don't have the answer either? Okay, man, I was hoping for some help there. And that's where some of these prophetic things get to be really difficult. We want to know nitpicky details, and God doesn't always give us those. So be very careful if somebody has an explanation for every minute detail. If God didn't give you the minute detail, don't get hard and fast with things. You let God define different things. And like I said, we're going to go into that more in chapter 7 and beyond. So as long as we're thinking about what we're reading and being careful, we can get some good insight. We just don't want to go past what God has laid out for us. Now, what we do see is God's intended lesson for Nebuchadnezzar. And he was very clear with that explanation in verse 25 at the end. Till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. Nebuchadnezzar, you need to get the point about this. But even though God was being very, very clear with Nebuchadnezzar, other people were in the room, I assume, as all of this was being explained. Because most likely this is a throne room situation. So other people, other listeners had a great position to also learn from Nebuchadnezzar's lesson. So right there, it's worth stopping and just saying, you know what? It's better to audit the classes from the School of Hard Knocks than to sign up yourself, right? If you can watch somebody else go through a really tough lesson and you can learn, do it. Keep your eyes open from other people going through things so that you can receive instruction. Man, that is way better. Sometimes I just have to sign up for classes myself because I'm hard-headed and I have to experience it for myself. So, that's not on anybody else, that's on me. But if you can look at somebody else's, please do. Now we see in verse 27, as was typical, Daniel's advice was very clear, is very direct, This guy did not pull punches, and he did not waste words. Very impressed with how Daniel formulates what he says. But we also hear a very compassionate note of pleading in verse 27. Sir, please accept my advice right now. Would you do what's right in God's eyes? This will possibly have an effect where your peace could be lengthened before all this comes down. That is a very bold addition, a very compassionate plea at the end of all of this. Daniel actually cared. He really did. I mean, it would be so easy to be angry at an authority that wrecked your life. But that is not what we see in this man's character. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. He cared about this guy. Please do what's right. I want to see you with as much peace in your life as possible. So really, Nebuchadnezzar's at peace. That means peace for everybody else. But sometimes we get so upset that we'd rather see somebody go down, whatever the consequences may be. That's not wise. It's not godly. We have to be careful. Now, it's at verse 28 to verse 33 that the tone of this passage changes. It's not first person from Nebuchadnezzar anymore. This is now outside party. So I assume this is Daniel again taking up the narrative, and he's going to fill in a very important gap in Nebuchadnezzar's testimony. Verse 28 says, and this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. All this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I've built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. And he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like the eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. So as we back up, we realize 12 months is, I don't know, I guess it depends on your own perspective. Was this a long time, or was this a short amount of time for somebody to have that pride creep back in? Personally, I think it was actually a pretty long amount of time. You know, was somebody that, you know, heard the first dream's interpretation that his empire was the head of gold, and he constructs a huge statue to commemorate this gold. This guy's ego is just massive, and it's only getting inflated. God knocks him down a couple notches, and now he gets this dream that really upsets him, and he realizes, man, I'm going to get handled. God's going to put me in my place. And Daniel says, sir, please do what is right, and God will extend your peace. And for the next 12 months, I think Nebuchadnezzar really listened to that. So Daniel's wise admonishment from verse 27 had temporarily influenced the king. Sorry, I have the word temporary. It should be temporarily influenced the king. It took 12 months before Nebuchadnezzar's pride resurfaced. I think that's a pretty long time for a guy in this position especially. But when you look at the specific phrasing of his statement, you see that it directly correlated with God's point. I'm the one in control, and I give the kingdom, and whoever I say gets it. And you look at Nebuchadnezzar's, I have built. So my abilities built this empire, not God's. By the might of my power, Nebuchadnezzar's thinking, my will allowed this to happen, not God's. When he said, for the honor of my majesty, Nebuchadnezzar says, I get credit, not Daniel's God, okay? What I see around me, this is me. Daniel's God says, I give it to whoever I will. No. I'm seeing what I built. I get credit for this. It's dangerous, folks. But God sees what's in our hearts. We have to be very, very careful. Now, if we look at 425, and then we compare that with previous things, direct correlation, a clear disagreement with what God had been teaching. But if you look back at Psalm 44, verse 21, and Ecclesiastes 12, verse 14, there are two very clear concepts that will explain this example. So I want to encourage you later to go look up those two verses. There are two key truths that I really want you to understand, because when those two things hit, God says, now it's time to teach you your lesson. So that's for a little homework assignment for you. And at this moment, Nebuchadnezzar spent the next 7 years in miserable shape. Now, I just realized looking through this again, it said 7 times. I've always been taught those times meant years. Was it 7 days? I kind of doubt it. Was it 7 months? Possibly. Years just fits in a little bit better. But again, we're not given a very specific, at least I've not seen in the passage yet, where that word meant years specifically. Don't know. If anybody comes across that detail, please let me know. I will gladly be corrected. But he spent a large chunk of time in miserable shape. So that's a really good reminder right there. We can pick our sin, but we don't get to pick our consequences. And we don't get to pick when those consequences hit. And we don't get to pick how long those consequences are going to take to fulfill themselves. How many times have we heard people, or maybe even out of our own hearts, God, I don't deserve this. Yeah, but you chose to sin. That's the choice you get to make. The rest, that's out of your hands. So maybe that ought to cause us to fear a little bit. If I do this stupid action that I know is wrong, I only know a portion of what might happen. Don't play that game. Just don't do it at all. So now in verse 34, it's clear that Nebuchadnezzar picks back up and resumes his testimony. So it's a good possibility that in this official documentation, if Daniel has a part of it, he inserts his section, verse 28 to verse 33, to explain and give a little more detail. Because you could read verse 27 right to verse 34. You still get the main point. But man, those verses really bring a lot out. Very, very valuable information. So verse 34 to verse 37 actually finishes out the chapter for us. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned unto me. And I blessed the Most High. I praised and honored him that liveth forever and ever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. None can stay his hand or say unto him, what doest thou? At the same time, my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom. An excellent majesty was added unto me. Now, I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment. And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. Powerful words from the most powerful man on the planet. Amazing testimony. So this is his realization that he's sharing with his empire. I think it's very interesting. The moment Nebuchadnezzar's sanity returned, automatically his thoughts were of God's greatness and superiority. I'm sorry, I didn't give you the word credit on that last blank. Apologize for that. There we go. Here's your next word, superiority. It's fitting that the recognition of God's position naturally places man in his rightful place. I was kind of imagine it like a teeter-totter. You know, the more we get elevated in our own pride, the more we drop God to a position he doesn't deserve. But then when we swing it and put God in his proper position in life, we take a back seat where we deserve to be, submissive and under his authority, which is the happiest place that we'll ever be, the safest place, the most blessed. So we're not on the same level with God. This is a teeter-totter where he deserves to be up in the air, and we just sit down and enjoy how great he is. Of course, that illustration only goes so far. Nobody likes being that kid that's stuck on the top side of the teeter-totter and nobody will let him down. I don't know if I could even use that illustration with younger kids. Do they play on teeter-totters anymore? Probably have to have pillows around them on the other side. They don't know the experience of having the kid on the bottom just jump off quick and then, break your tailbone. Sorry. So, rabbit trail. All right. Nebuchadnezzar's leadership team expectantly awaited his return. Not only did God protect his position from power-hungry opportunists, but Nebuchadnezzar was given heightened respect after his ordeal. It was clear to all that the Almighty wanted this man in this position. I just love to sit and dream. It's like, what would it be like if the leaders of our country got a hold of the principles of verse 37? God is the one who rules. He puts people in their positions. Nobody can change what God is doing. And those that walk in pride, God will humble them. Oh, may this return to the halls of Congress, to the House and the Senate. May it filter all the way down to our locale and the people that are in any positions, whether it be police or city councils. May we remember that God's the one in control. Our country would return to greatness so quickly. Our society would have the proper influences. I am continually amazed and thankful, here's your last word, for the long-suffering nature of God. He knew that Nebuchadnezzar was teachable, and therefore sent dreams and lessons to change Nebuchadnezzar's heart. This encourages me as I look in the mirror and at individuals around me. Folks, God humbled Nebuchadnezzar. But why did he go to all this work to send that first dream, to knock him down with the image, to send another dream that let him know that he's going to be an animal for 7 times, years, months, whatever? It's because God saw the potential in this man's heart. Yes, there was a massive amount of dangerous pride, but he saw teachability. And so God gave the effort an opportunity for this man to grow. That is really encouraging. Only God knows the limits within our hearts. So let's just give him teachability, and with time and God's moves, he will work all sorts of stuff out of our lives. I'm thankful for that. And may that give you patience with other people as well. God's working on them too, as long as they are teachable. Now, all that's been done in Nebuchadnezzar's life for all of these chapters, as soon as we get into chapter 5, this is an example of somebody who does not have a teachable heart, and when God humbles them, that means their life is done. Very stark contrast, but one that we would do well to become very sober about. Let us remain teachable and stay humble before God. Mr. Hendry.
If you look at the end of chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4, you can see how God works on Nebuchadnezzar's heart, even though he doesn't really think about it to begin with. He starts out, your God's a pretty good parlor trick, playing God. Chapter 3, he says, he's the top of all gods. But then chapter 4, he is God.
It takes a while to get things through our skulls. And I will be the first in line there. I've got Cawley DNA, which gives us naturally thick skulls. My dad would sit there and smile and nod his head if he was sitting over there like usual, because we are a stubborn people, and we are regulars in the school of hard knocks. But God knows hearts, and he keeps working on us, and I'm thankful for that. And God's that kind of God. So we praise him tonight for being the long-suffering God who gives us hope, works on us, and puts us in the place that we need to be happiest and to be of most use. Amazing stuff. This is really practical. Daniel is giving us some wonderful, wonderful lessons that really help us in day-to-day life. So we'll be looking next week at Belshazzar, let's see, it's not just the next guy in line, but the guy after him. There's some history in between. But boy, did this guy mess up quick. But we'll get there when we get there next Wednesday. Let's pray. Lord, abnormal night that we're done a little bit sooner, but I thank you very much for the practicality of your word. Humility is something that is wonderful to talk about, but it's really tough to experience. But Lord, it's so vital. And I thank you that you could take the most powerful man in the world with probably the biggest ego on the planet, and because he was teachable, actually put him into a place where he glorified you, not just in his own heart, but literally across the world's biggest empire. He gave you notoriety and praise and related almost all of these details to his entire nation. God, that's incredible. I know we don't have that kind of power and influence ourselves, but Father, help us to be of humble heart. Help us to be teachable so that we can lift you up in our sphere of influence and do the best that we can. Lord, I thank you so much for loving us and giving us all this investment, all this time, and taking us from where we were to where we are. And God, help us to be hopeful and encouraged for where you're going to take us in the future. Lord, may we give you a teachable heart, and may you praise yourself through our lives. We love you. We thank you in your Son's name. Amen.